The ancient trees of the hollow grove loomed over the town of Coldbrook like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching towards the perpetually gray sky. For generations, the townspeople had lived in uneasy coexistence with the forest, whispering tales of its malevolence to wide-eyed children and casting furtive glances at its shadowy depths. But now, as Lila Tanner stood at the edge of Main Street, she could see that something had changed. The trees were no longer content to remain with I. Lila had left Coldbrook years ago, eager to escape its suffocating atmosphere of superstition and fear. She had made a name for herself in the world of botany, her logical mind and keen observational skills earning her accolades in academic circles. Yet here she was, drawn back to her hometown by reports of an inexplicable phenomenon: the rapid, unnatural growth of the hollow grove. As she surveyed the scene before her, Lila felt a chill run down her spine. The trees at the edge of town seemed to have crept closer overnight, their roots buckling the asphalt of the street, and their branches scraping against the sides of buildings. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of wood straining against brick and mortar. "Dr. Tanner!" a voice called out, startling Lila from her reverie. She turned to see Mayor Clarence Blackwood hurrying towards her, his portly frame wheezing with the effort. "Thank goodness you've arrived. We're at our wits' end here." Lila nodded grimly, her eyes never leaving the encroaching tree line. "How long has this been going on, Mayor?" Blackwood wrung his hands nervously. "It started about a month ago. At first we thought it was just our imagination, you know. But then we started losing houses on the outskirts of town. The trees just swallowed them up." "And the people in those houses?" Lila asked, dreading the answer. The mayor's face paled. "Gone, all of them. We've searched, but—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Lila's scientific mind rebelled against the implications. Trees didn't grow this fast. They didn't consume buildings or people. Yet the evidence before her eyes was undeniable. "I'll need to examine the trees up close," she said, steeling herself for what lay ahead. As they walked towards the edge of town, Lila noticed the fearful glances of the townspeople. Many recognized her, but few offered more than a curt nod of acknowledgement. She had been an outsider even when she lived here, her questioning nature and skepticism setting her apart from those who clung to old superstitions. The closer they got to the hollow grove, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew thick and heavy, as if weighted down by some unseen presence. The shadows between the trees seemed to writhe and twist, playing tricks on Lila's eyes. "Here," Mayor Blackwood said, stopping abruptly. "This is as far as anyone's dared to go." Lila peered into the gloom of the forest. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than any she had ever seen. Their bark was black and knotted, resembling the wrinkled skin of some prehistoric beast. But it was the silence that unnerved her the most. No birds sang, no insects chirped. It was as if all life had been leached from the very air. "I'll need to take some samples," Lila muttered, more to herself than to the mayor. She reached into her bag for a pair of pruning shears and a collection vial. As she approached the nearest tree, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the grove, carrying with it a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakably present. "Lila." She whirled around, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" The mayor looked at her quizzically. "Hear what?" Lila shook her head, trying to clear it. "Nothing. Never mind." She turned back to the tree, determined to maintain her scientific detachment. As she reached out to clip a small branch, the wind picked up again. This time the whisper was louder, more insistent. "Lila, you shouldn't have come back." Her hand trembled as she cut the branch. As soon as the shears snipped through the wood, a shudder ran through the entire grove. The trees seemed to sway and groan, though there was no wind to move them. Lila stumbled backward, nearly colliding with the mayor. "We need to go, now." As they hurried back towards the town, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching her from the depths of the forest. She clutched the vial containing the branch tightly, knowing that it held the key to unraveling this mystery. Back in the relative safety of the town hall, Lila set up a makeshift laboratory. She examined the branch under a microscope, ran chemical analyses, and pored over old botanical texts. but nothing in her scientific training could explain what she was seeing. The cells of the branch were unlike anything she had ever encountered. They seemed to pulse with an inner life, dividing and multiplying at an impossible rate. And there was something else, a presence that she could feel but not quantify, as if the very essence of the forest was contained within this single twig. As night fell, Lila found herself alone in the town hall, surrounded by books and notes. The silence of the building was broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood, or was it the sound of trees growing, inching ever closer to the heart of Coldbrook? A sudden knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. Old Mrs. Pemberton, the town librarian, shuffled into the room, her rheumy eyes fixed on Lila with an intensity that belied her frail appearance. "You're looking in the wrong place, child," she said without preamble. Lila frowned. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Pemberton hobbled over to the table, her gnarled fingers tracing the edge of an open book. "The answers you seek aren't in these modern tomes. You need to look to the past." "The past?" Lila echoed, intrigued despite her skepticism. The old woman nodded sagely. "There are stories, you see. Old stories that the townsfolk have tried to forget. But the grove remembers. Oh yes, it remembers everything." A chill ran down Lila's spine. "What kind of stories?" Mrs. Pemberton's eyes took on a faraway look. "Stories of the first settlers, of the pact they made and broke, of the price we've all been paying ever since." Before Lila could press for more information, a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouts and screams echoed through the night air. Lila rushed to the window, her breath catching in her throat at the sight before her. The trees of the hollow grove were on the move. Massive roots erupted from the ground, cracking pavement and toppling buildings. Branches reached out like grasping fingers, ensnaring anything in their path. And in the midst of it all, Lila could have sworn she saw faces in the bark of the trees, twisted, agonized visages that seemed to cry out in silent anguish. As the chaos unfolded before her, Lila realized that she was witnessing something beyond the realm of science. The hollow grove was not just a forest, it was an entity unto itself, awakened from centuries of slumber and hell-bent on reclaiming what it had lost. In that moment, standing in the flickering lights of the town hall as the world outside descended into madness, Lila Tanner understood that she had stumbled upon a truth far more terrifying than any ghost story or local legend. The hollow grove was alive, and it was hungry. The night stretched on, filled with the screams of the townspeople and the relentless advance of the trees. Lila knew that by morning, Coldbrook would be forever changed, and she, with her scientific knowledge and logical mind, might be the only one who could unravel the mystery of the grove and save what was left of her hometown. But as she watched the trees draw ever closer, their branches scraping against the windows of the town hall, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a terrifying thought. What if it was already too late? Dawn broke over Coldbrook, painting the sky in sickly hues of green and gray. Lila Tanner stood at the window of the town hall, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. The scene before her was one of devastation. Where once stood neat rows of houses and well-maintained streets, now sprawled a tangle of roots and branches. The hollow grove had advanced relentlessly through the night, swallowing entire blocks in its voracious march. "My God," Mayor Blackwood whispered, coming to stand beside her. His face was ashen, the events of the night having aged him a decade. "What are we going to do?" Lila's mind raced. Her scientific training urged her to approach this methodically, to gather data and form hypotheses. But the whispers she had heard, the impossible movement of the trees, these defied all rational explanation. "We need to evacuate," she said firmly. "Get everyone out of town while we still can." The mayor nodded numbly, turning to organize the remaining townspeople. As he left, Mrs. Pemberton shuffled up to Lila, her rheumy eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "It won't matter," the old librarian croaked. "The grove won't let us leave, not until it's done." Lila felt a chill run down her spine. Done with what? Mrs. Pemberton's gaze seemed to look through her, focused on some distant point in time or space. "With its revenge, child. The grove is collecting on an old debt, one paid in blood and broken promises. Before Lila could press for more information, a commotion outside drew her attention. A group of townspeople had gathered at the edge of the newly expanded forest, armed with axes and chainsaws. Leading them was Jack Hawthorne, owner of the local lumber mill and a man known for his stubborn determination. "We're taking back our town," Jack shouted, revving his chainsaw. "Who's with me?" A cheer went up from the crowd, but Lila felt her stomach drop. She rushed outside, pushing her way through the throng of people. "Stop," she cried. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Jack turned to her, his face twisted in a sneer. "We know exactly what we're dealing with, Dr. Tanner. Trees, and trees can be cut down." With that, he plunged his chainsaw into the nearest trunk. The scream that erupted from the wood was unlike anything Lila had ever heard, a sound of pure agony that seemed to resonate from the very earth itself. The other townspeople faltered, lowering their weapons in shock. But it was already too late. The branches of the surrounding trees whipped down with impossible speed, wrapping around Jack's body. In an instant, he was pulled into the air, his screams mingling with the otherworldly howl of the forest. The crowd scattered in panic as more branches lashed out, grasping at anything within reach. Lila stood rooted to the spot, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The trees were not just moving, they were attacking with purpose, with malice. This was no mere act of nature. This was war. As chaos erupted around her, Lila felt a gnarled hand grasp her arm. Mrs. Pemberton pulled her close, her voice urgent. "The library," she hissed. "The answers you seek are in the library. Look for the founding charter, child. Look for the names." With that cryptic message, the old woman shuffled off into the mayhem, leaving Lila to make a split-second decision. Stay and try to help the panicking townspeople, or seek out the information that might be their only hope of survival. Her scientific curiosity won out. Lila sprinted towards the library, dodging grasping branches and fleeing townsfolk. The old building stood like an island of calm in the sea of chaos, its stone walls as yet untouched by the encroaching forest. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of old books. Lila made her way to the reference section, her eyes scanning the shelves for anything related to the town's history. After what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, she found it. A leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with age, bearing the title, The Founding of Coldbrook. With trembling hands, she opened the book. The first page bore an intricate illustration of the town as it must have looked centuries ago. A small cluster of buildings surrounded by the vast expanse of the hollow grove. But it was the text beneath that made Lila's blood run cold. "In the year of our Lord 1692, we, the undersigned, do hereby establish the township of Coldbrook on this hallowed ground. We acknowledge the great sacrifice made to clear this land and vow to honor the compact made with the guardians of the forest." What followed was a list of names, the original settlers of Coldbrook. Lila's eyes widened as she recognized many of them: Hawthorne, Blackwood, Tanner. Her own family name was there, among those who had made this mysterious compact with the forest. A rustling sound behind her made Lila whirl around. She found herself face to face with Mrs. Pemberton, the old woman's eyes glowing with an unnatural green light. "Now you begin to understand," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "The compact was broken, child. The sacred groves were cut down, the guardians of the forest betrayed. And now, after centuries of slumber, they have awakened to claim what is rightfully theirs." Lila's mind reeled. "What are you? What are these guardians?" Mrs. Pemberton's form seemed to shimmer, her human visage melting away to reveal something ancient and terrible. Bark-like skin, eyes like pools of green fire, fingers that elongated into twisting branches. "We are the memory of the forest," the being that was no longer Mrs. Pemberton intoned. "We are its will made manifest. And you, Lila Tanner, descendant of the Oathbreakers, shall be our instrument of reckoning." Before Lila could react, the creature's branch-like fingers shot out, wrapping around her arms and legs. She felt a searing pain as they burrowed into her skin, green tendrils snaking beneath the surface. Lila screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the sudden groaning of wood. The walls of the library began to warp and twist, books tumbling from shelves as the entire building was consumed by the living forest. As consciousness slipped away, Lila's last thought was of the town she had tried to save. Coldbrook was doomed, and she, through some quirk of heredity, was to be the unwilling agent of its destruction. The darkness took her then, a darkness that pulsed with the green fire of an ancient alien intelligence. And in that void, Lila Tanner ceased to be herself. She became something else, something that straddled the line between humanity and the primal force that was the Hollow Grove. When she opened her eyes again, the world had changed. She saw not with human sight, but through a vast network of roots and branches that stretched across the entirety of what had once been Coldbrook. Every tree, every leaf, every twisted tendril of vegetation was an extension of her new self. And through this vast green consciousness, she felt the presence of others, the townspeople, their bodies and minds absorbed into the living wood, their memories and essences feeding the insatiable hunger of the grove. They were not dead, not truly, but what remained of them was so far removed from humanity that death might have been a mercy. Lila tried to scream, to rebel against this forced metamorphosis, but her voice emerged only as the rustling of leaves, her protest nothing more than the creaking of branches in a non-existent wind. From the heart of the Hollow Grove, a will older than human civilization pulsed outward. It spoke to Lila in a language of root and sap, of sunlight and soil. And despite herself, she understood. The compact had been broken, the balance had been disturbed, and now, with Lila as its avatar, the Hollow Grove would reclaim not just Coldbrook, but the world beyond. Town by town, city by city, the ancient forest would spread, erasing the works of mankind and returning the earth to a primeval state. As this revelation washed over her, Lila felt the last vestiges of her human self slipping away. She was becoming one with the grove, a sentinel of bark and leaf, eternal and implacable. In her final moments of individual consciousness, Lila Tanner, once a scientist devoted to understanding the natural world, became the instrument of nature's revenge against humanity. And the Hollow Grove continued to grow. The entity that had once been Lila Tanner pulsed with ancient verdant power. Through a vast network of roots and branches, it perceived the world in ways no human mind could comprehend. The remnants of Coldbrook lay buried beneath a sea of writhing vegetation, its buildings crushed and its people absorbed into the living wood of the Hollow Grove. But the grove's hunger was far from sated. Tendrils of green crept outward, probing the earth beyond the boundaries of what had once been Coldbrook. The world beyond called to the grove, a siren song of concrete and steel that begged to be reclaimed by nature's inexorable grasp. Yet deep within the heart of this vegetative consciousness, a spark of humanity still flickered. Lila Tanner, or what remained of her, struggled against the overwhelming will of the forest. Her scientific mind, even in this transformed state, sought to understand, to quantify, to find some logic in the madness that had consumed her. Through the grove's vast awareness, Lila perceived the approach of outsiders. National Guard troops, scientists, government officials, all drawn by the sudden silence from Coldbrook and the inexplicable growth of the forest. They came with guns and sensors, with cameras and protective suits, woefully unprepared for the eldritch horror that awaited them. As the first helicopters appeared over the canopy, Lila felt the grove's ancient fury surge. Branches shot upward with impossible speed, ensnaring the aircraft and dragging them down into the leafy abyss. The screams of the pilots were cut short as tendrils burst through metal and glass, absorbing man and machine alike into the ever-growing biomass. On the ground, the situation was no less dire. Soldiers found their weapons useless against an enemy that could regenerate in seconds. Scientists watched in horror as their instruments registered readings that defied all known laws of physics and biology. And through it all, the grove continued to expand, its influence spreading like a virulent infection across the land. But as the chaos unfolded, something unexpected occurred. The part of Lila that still clung to humanity began to perceive patterns in the grove's behavior. The forest was not just attacking blindly, it was seeking out specific individuals, those whose genetic makeup resonated with the original settlers of Coldbrook. the oath-breakers who had first violated the compact with the forest. With this realization came a glimmer of hope. If the grove's vengeance was targeted, perhaps it could be reasoned with. Perhaps there was a way to restore the balance without the wholesale destruction of humanity. Lila focused all her remaining willpower on this idea, pushing against the overwhelming consciousness of the grove. It was like trying to divert a tsunami with a teaspoon, but slowly, incrementally, she began to make progress. Images flashed through the vast network of the forest, memories not just of destruction, but of symbiosis. Humans and nature coexisting, each benefiting from the other. The original compact had not been one of subjugation, but of mutual respect and benefit. The grove's fury faltered, confusion rippling through its awareness. This was not the outcome it had envisioned, not the vengeance it had sought for centuries. The tendrils of vegetation paused in their relentless advance, quivering with indecision. Seizing this moment of uncertainty, Lila pushed harder. She showed the grove visions of a possible future, one where humans learned from their mistakes, where the balance could be restored. It would require sacrifice, yes, but not the annihilation of an entire species. For what seemed like an eternity, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The grove's consciousness roiled and churned, ancient instincts warring with this new perspective, and then slowly the tide began to turn. The vegetative onslaught receded, pulling back from the terrified humans at its edges. The absorbed victims of Coldbrook were not released. Their fate was sealed, but the grove's expansion halted. Through the network of roots and leaves, a message pulsed outward. It was not in words, not in any language humans could understand, but its meaning was clear. A chance. One final chance for redemption. As the surviving humans cautiously approached the edge of the hollow grove, they found themselves face to face with a being that defied description. Part woman, part tree, an avatar of nature's power that radiated an aura of both menace and mercy. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of rustling leaves and creaking wood, underlaid with the faintest echo of Lila Tanner's human tones. The compact must be renewed, it intoned. The balance must be restored. This is your final warning and your last opportunity. Government officials, religious leaders, and scientists gathered at the edge of the grove, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they faced. Negotiations began, tense, fraught discussions that would determine the future of human civilization's relationship with the natural world. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Slowly, painfully, a new compact took shape. Vast swathes of land would be returned to nature, allowed to rewild under the grove's influence. In exchange, humanity would be permitted to continue its existence, albeit in a far more harmonious relationship with the environment. As the new compact was sealed, the being that had once been Lila Tanner felt a sense of completion. Her human consciousness had served its purpose, providing the bridge between two worlds that had teetered on the brink of mutual destruction. With a final pulse of awareness, Lila Tanner bid farewell to her human identity. She merged fully with the consciousness of the hollow grove, becoming one with the ancient forest that would now stand as both protector and warning to humanity. The hollow grove remained, a dark and brooding presence on the edge of human civilization. Those who ventured too close whispered of strange sightings. A woman's face formed from bark and leaf, watching from the depths of the forest. A living reminder of the price of broken promises and the power of nature unleashed. And so the world changed. Humanity, chastened by its brush with annihilation, began the long process of relearning its place in the natural order. Cities were redesigned, industries transformed, all under the watchful eye of the grove. For in the heart of that dark forest, in every rustling leaf and creaking branch, the essence of Lila Tanner remained. A guardian born of both worlds, ensuring that the compact would never again be broken. The hollow grove had reclaimed its due, and the balance at long last was restored.